Hello and welcome to the Ansible for the Absolute Beginners course. My name is Mumshad Manambat and I will be your instructor for this course. I'm a DevOps trainer at codecloud.com, the true hands-on learn-by-doing platform. I've been working in the industry as a consultant for over 13 years and have helped hundreds of thousands of students learn technology in a fun and interactive way. In this course, you will learn Ansible through a series of lectures that use animation and fun illustrations that simplify complex concepts. We have demos that will show you how to install and get started with Ansible. And most importantly, we have hands-on exercises that you can access right in your browser. At the end of the course, you will work on a real-world project of deploying the CodeCloud e-commerce application using simple playbooks. Let's now look at the objectives of this course. Since this is for the absolute beginners, we go all the way from scratch, covering everything you need to know to get started. You don't need any prior coding or scripting experience. We will get started with understanding what Ansible is and what it can do. We will go through how to set up Ansible using a simple virtual machine deployed using Virtualbox. Then we will get started with an introduction to YAML, which is the language of Ansible. All Ansible playbooks are written in YAML. One of the common challenges that beginners face in Ansible is understanding how to work with YAML. But don't worry, we've got your back. We have a number of coding exercises that will get you all set with YAML in no time. We will then head over to Ansible inventory files, playbooks, and various concepts such as variables, conditionals, loops, and roles. Again, all of these concepts are accompanied by hands-on exercises that give you enough practice to be confident in automating with Ansible. As with all of our other courses, we have hands-on exercises that you can access right in your browser. The browser gives you a quiz portal with a set of questions and an editor to answer the question. Develop YAML files and playbooks to solve the quiz. If you run into issues, you may view the hints or the solution section for the answer, or reach us through our Q&A section. So let's get started. I'm ready when you are. All of these very repetitive tasks involve execution of hundreds of commands on hundreds of different servers while maintaining the right sequence of events with system reboots and whatnot in between. Some people develop scripts to automate these tasks, but that requires coding skills and regular maintenance of these scripts, and a lot of time to put these scripts together in the first place. That's where Ansible helps. Ansible is a powerful IT automation tool that you can learn quickly. It's simple enough for everyone in IT, yet powerful enough to automate even the most complex deployments. In the past, something that took developing a complex script now takes just a few lines of instruction in an Ansible automation playbook. Whether you want to make that happen on your local host or on all of your database servers or all of your web servers on cloud or just the ones on your DR environment, all it takes is modifying one line. Now, don't worry about the playbook itself or its syntax for now. We will get into that in a bit, and we have lots of fun exercises coming up that will get you all set with this in no time. Let's take a look at a simple use case. Imagine you have a number of hosts in your environment that you would like to restart in a particular order. Some of them are web servers and others are database servers. So you would like to power down the web servers first, followed by the database servers, and then power up the database servers and then the web servers. You could write an Ansible playbook to get this done in a matter of minutes and simply invoke the Ansible playbook every time you wish to restart your application. Let's take a look at another example. In this case, we are setting up a complex infrastructure that spans across public and private clouds, and that includes hundreds of VMs. With Ansible, you could provision VMs on public clouds like Amazon, and as well as private cloud environments like VMware, and move on to configuring applications on those and setting up communication between them, such as modifying configuration files, installing applications on them, configuring firewall rules, etc. There are a lot of built-in modules available in Ansible that supports these kind of operations. You can easily integrate Ansible with the rest of your environment so that you can pull information to be used in the automation process, such as data from a CMDB database to get the list of VMs you want to target, or you can configure Ansible to trigger automation automatically when from tools like ServiceNow when a workflow gets approved. The Ansible documentation pages hosted at docs.ansible.com are comprehensive and contains all the information required to get started with Ansible, and there are hundreds of examples of playbooks in these pages. We will be referring to these while setting up and installing Ansible. So that's a quick introduction to what Ansible is, why you might want to consider it, and what it can do. Going forward, we will look at how to quickly get started by setting up an Ansible lab environment, and I will see you in the next lecture. All flavors of operating systems like Windows, Linux, and OS X. So this is what we plan to do. We will first install Oracle Virtualbox on our laptop, and then we'll create a template system based on the CentOS operating system. Once we create the template, we will then be able to easily create multiple virtual machines as required from that template. For the purpose of this lab, we will first create a Ansible control machine from the template, and then we will move on to create 2 other machines which will act as the target machine for Ansible to perform configuration changes on. Okay, so in my case, I have a Windows system, so I will be setting up a lab environment on my Windows system. It doesn't really matter what operating system you're on. You could follow the same instructions to set up a lab environment on Linux or your Mac operating systems. So in our case, we're going to install Virtualbox. So go to virtualbox.org, and in the website, you will find a link to download the Virtualbox software. In the download page, you will find links to download Virtualbox for specific operating systems. In my case, mine is Windows. So I'm going to click on Windows, and I'm going to download the software. Once downloaded, run the executable and follow the instructions. I've already installed it, so I'm just going to cancel that. After you install, open up the Oracle VM Virtualbox interface, and it will look something like this. Now, the next step is to deploy virtual machines. In order to do that, you can either create a machine, attach a CD drive of an operating system, and follow the instructions to install the operating system as we are familiar with. However, there's also another easy way. There are pre-installed, pre-configured operating system images available on the internet. We could use those to easily deploy as many virtual machines as we need. For this, if you go to the website osboxes.org, you will find a lot of pre-installed, pre-configured images of various operating systems. Go to the site and select the VM images, Virtualbox images link at the top. Then you will find a list of various different operating systems. From this, we will select CentOS. And then it will take us to the CentOS page. Here you can see information on downloading the CentOS image. In our case, we're downloading the Virtualbox image for CentOS 7, and we're downloading the 64-bit version. So remember to download that particular version. We will then, it is downloaded as a .7z file, which is a compressed file. So you need a software to uncompress it, like a tar or WinZip. In my case, I'm using the 7zip software to extract the contents of the file into a folder. Wait for it to finish the extraction process. Once finished, if you go into the folder, you will see that there's a folder called 64-bit. And inside that folder, you'll find a file with the extension .vdi. That stands for virtual disk. And that is what we will use to create our virtual machine. We're now ready to create a new virtual machine. So we go back into the Oracle VM Virtualbox interface, click on New, and we fill in the name and operating system. Now I will name the virtual machine that I'm creating as CentOS-template, because as we discussed, our goal is to create a template and then use that template to create as many virtual machines as I need. So I'm going to name it as CentOS-template. I will now select the type as Linux, and the version, since it does not have CentOS listed, I could simply select Other. Now, as you can see under the versions, there are 32-bit as well as 64-bit options. In our case, we downloaded the CentOS 64-bit version, so we must select a 64-bit option. Now, in case you do not see the 64-bit options in this list, now that is most probably because you do not have the virtualization technology enabled on your laptop. To enable virtualization technology on your laptop, it is usually under the BIOS settings. So if you simply Google enable virtualization in BIOS followed by your laptop model, you will see a set of results. It usually looks something like this. Under the BIOS, under the advanced BIOS features, you'll have something called as virtualization technology. And you must ensure that it is set to enable state. So once you do that, restart your laptop and you will find the 64-bit option. Select the other Linux 64-bit option for this and click next. In the next, here we select a memory size. By default, it's set to 512 MB. And let's change that to around 2 GB. So we'll set it to 2 gigs. In the next step, we select the hard disk that we downloaded. So in this case, the default selection is create a virtual hard disk now, but that's not what we want. We already have a pre-built image of a hard disk downloaded. So we're going to specify that. Select the use an existing virtual hard disk file option and click on browse and browse to the file that we downloaded and extracted, which is the CentOS 7 file with the VDI extension. Click on OK, and that creates the file. Now, before powering on the template, we will go into settings and make a few more changes. Go to system, and we'll increase the CPU to around 2. And we go to network section, and we will set the adapter 1 to bridged network. This way, my virtual machine gets an IP address, as well as it can connect to the internet to download and install packages as required. I will now go ahead and power on the system. Okay, I'm now at the login prompt. Select the default user, which is OS Boxes. Now the password, to find out the password for any images downloaded from osboxes.org, go to the info section, and then you'll see that the username is osboxes and the password is osboxes.org. So I'm going to use that password, osboxes.org. I'll click on sign in to log into the CentOS system. I'll open up a terminal and type in ifconfig. The ifconfig command tells me the IP address currently assigned to the virtual machine. As you can see, it is 192.168.1.112. Now, I will open up a SSH terminal to SSH into that virtual machine. And in my case, I'm using a terminal software called as MobaXterm. I like to use this. This is a free software that is available. You could use any SSH terminal software. You could simply use PuTTY as well. So create a new SSH session and specify the IP address, which is 192.168.1.112. And the username is osboxes. Click on OK. I will specify the password, which is osboxes.org, and I'm logged in. Once I verify that I'm able to SSH into it, I will now shut it down so that I can create clones of this virtual machine. Hello, and welcome to this demo. Okay, the virtual machine is now powered off. I'll now right-click on it and select Clone. And in the new virtual machine page, I'm going to give it a name. So the first clone is going to be the Ansible master. So I'm going to name it as Ansible controller. And make sure that you check the reset MAC address option, because I need a new MAC address for all my virtual machines. In the next page, I'm going to make sure I select a linked clone. A linked clone will basically is space saving. It does not consume the entire, it does not clone the entire virtual machine, so it does not consume that much space. I'm now going to click on clone to create a clone of the virtual machine. So I now have the Ansible controller, and I'm going to create another clone for the Ansible target. For the first Ansible target, I will name it as Ansible-target1. I'll make sure I check the initialize MAC address option, and I will select the linked clone. So now I have a template. I have a master. I have an Ansible controller and an Ansible target. I will now power up the Ansible controller and the Ansible target. Once they're powered on, I will log into it using the osboxes password. I will open a terminal and run the ifconfig command to find out the IP address. Now, the reason I find out the IP address and establish an SSH connection is that I find it very easy to work with these virtual machines over an SSH session rather than through this terminal window. That way, I can easily copy and paste commands. Okay, I will now establish an SSH session to my Ansible master. The IP address is 192.168.1.113. The username is osboxes. This time, I will name the session as Ansible-controller. Okay, so I'm logged in. I will also establish a session to my target machine, which is at 192.168.1.114, and I will name the session as Ansible-target1. Okay, so I now have a session to the controller and the target. The next step is to rename the host. As you can see, both my controller and target are named as OS boxes. I'd like to name the controller as controller and the target as target. So the first step is to modify the /etc/host name file. If you look inside the file, it is currently OS boxes. So I'm going to remove that and replace it with the name that I want, which is Ansible controller. I'm now going to save that. And the other place to modify is the etc hosts file. So I'm going to edit the /etc/hosts file. And I'll get rid of whatever is already there and replace it with the name that I want it to have. I will leave the local host part as it is. And I can now restart my system. I will repeat the same steps for the target 1 system. Okay, I will now restart my system. Now we're going to duplicate what we did with target 1. We'll create another clone called target 2. Make sure we reinitialize the MAC address and select linked clone as the option for clone type. And then we will power on the target 2 machine. Once it's powered on, we will log into it, open a terminal, and find the IP address of it. In this case, it is 192.168.1.115. We will now establish an SSH connection to the system from my SSH terminal, and I will name the session as Ansible-target2. I will now edit the host name to target2. We will shut it down and wait for it to come back up. I will now establish connectivity to my systems again. And as you can see, the name is applied. I can now see it as Ansible-controller. So the next step is to install Ansible on the Ansible controller. If you go to the Ansible documentation site and look at the installation guide, you will see instructions for installing Ansible on various operating systems. If you look at the instructions under CentOS, you can see that it's as simple as running the command yum install Ansible. So I'm just going to copy that and execute that on my CentOS system and provide the confirmation to install the packages. Okay, once completed, you can run the Ansible --version command to confirm that Ansible is installed and to confirm the version of the Ansible installed on the system. So that concludes the Ansible installation part. We will now look at configuring inventory in Ansible. Ansible can work with one or multiple systems in your infrastructure at the same time. In order to work with multiple servers, Ansible needs to establish connectivity to those servers. This is done using SSH for Linux and PowerShell remoting for Windows. That's what makes Ansible agentless. Agentless means that you don't need to install any additional software on the target machines to be able to work with Ansible. A simple SSH connectivity would suffice Ansible's needs. One of the major disadvantages of most other orchestration tools is that you're required to configure an agent on the target systems before you can invoke any kind of automation. Now, information about these target systems is stored in an inventory file. If you don't create a new inventory file, Ansible uses the default inventory file located at etc Ansible hosts location. Let's take a look at a sample inventory file. The inventory file is in an INI-like format. It's simply a number of servers listed one after the other. You can also group different servers together by defining it like this. Enter the name of the group within square brackets and define the list of servers part of that group in the lines below. You can have multiple groups defined in a single inventory file. Let's take a closer look at inventory files. For example, I have a list of servers named from 1 to 4. However, I would like to refer to these servers in Ansible using an alias, such as web server or database server. I could do this by adding an alias for each server at the beginning of the line and assigning the address of that server to Ansible_host parameter. Ansible_host is an inventory parameter used to specify the FQDN or IP address of a server. There are other inventory parameters too. Some of them are Ansible_connection, Ansible_port, Ansible_user, and Ansible_ssh_pass.
Ansible_connection is what defines how Ansible connects to the target server. As we discussed in the previous slide, is this a SSH connection to a Linux server or a WinRM connection to a Windows server? This is how we define if the target host we wish to connect to is a Linux or a Windows host. You could also set it to localhost to indicate that we would like to work with the local host and not connect to any remote hosts. If you don't have multiple servers to play around with, you could simply start with a local host in your inventory file. Ansible_port defines which part to connect to. By default, it is set to port 22 for SSH, but if you need to change, you can set it differently using Ansible_port parameter. Ansible_user defines the user used to make remote connections. By default, this is set to root for Linux machines. If you need to change this, define it as shown here. Ansible_ssh_pass defines the SSH password for Linux. Note that storing passwords in plain text format like this may not be very ideal. The best practice is to set up SSH key-based passwordless authentication between the servers, and you should definitely do that in your production or corporate environments. But for now, we want to start with the absolute basics of Ansible without getting too much into security or other topics. So to begin with, we'll start with a really basic setup with a username and password. Otherwise, you would be stuck configuring and troubleshooting security issues for the most part of this course. Well, that's it for this lecture. Head over to the coding challenges and practice working with inventory files in Ansible. I will see you.